Joan and Richard had known each other since high school. Their friendship blossomed into a nearly 30-year marriage. Richard, a software developer, and Joan, a hospital lab technician, built a life together based on shared dreams and mutual respect. But over time, subtle changes appeared in their relationship. Joan grew more distant, which worried Richard, but he attributed it to work stress. Lately, Joan had become secretive and preoccupied, but Richard trusted her and didn't push. Unbeknownst to him, Joan was torn between her family and a resurfaced connection from her past. As she prepared for a vacation with her sister, Richard hoped the time apart would help them reconnect. On Sunday, October 3rd, 2010, as Joan and her sister headed for the airport shuttle, Richard wished her well and joked, "Enjoy yourself and don't worry about me. I'll be fine." Joan smiled, and her sister Brenda teased, "Just don't let your sister get into trouble." Joan playfully responded, "I'll behave." "Behave yourself. I'll be back in 2 weeks, and I expect the house to be intact. Be careful, and remember, I love you more than anything," Joan said, kissing Richard deeply before leaving. Brenda, impatient in the van, quipped, "Come on, we've got a plane to catch." Joan mouthed, "Which?" while Richard rolled his eyes and said, "Bye, hun, I love you too." As the van drove away, Richard muttered, "Finally, they're gone." Returning to the house, Richard thought excitedly about his surprise plan. Over the next few days, he and their son Mark would transform the master bedroom into Joan's dream room from a magazine. This was his special 30th anniversary gift. Richard called Mark, urging him to get moving. They had a lot of work to do, painting, replacing the carpet, and assembling new furniture, all while Joan was away on her Caribbean cruise. Richard began packing up the bedroom, moving everything into the spare room. After emptying the dresser, nightstands, and armoire, he faced the challenge of clearing out their 2 large walk-in closets. Over 30 years, these closets had become storage for all kinds of things, thanks to both Richard's and Joan's pack rat tendencies. They kept everything from old tools to school papers, making the task daunting but essential for the surprise renovation. With a sigh, Richard headed into his closet. Nearly an hour later, he had everything boxed up and moved to the spare bedroom. Next, he tackled Joan's closet, feeling overwhelmed just standing at the entrance. Mark entered, saying, "I brought you lunch," and promptly tripped over some boxes. "Geez," Richard exclaimed, "knock or something. You almost gave me a heart attack." "Sorry, here's your sandwich and soda," Mark replied. They sat on the bed and ate in silence for about 15 minutes. After finishing, Richard said, "I'll pack the small stuff and you move the larger items to the spare room. Then we need to get the furniture to the garage for Goodwill." "Okay," Mark agreed, as usual, with a short response. They began working on Joan's closet. Richard packed clothes, shoes, and small items, while Mark carried boxes to the spare room. When Mark found a small case on a top shelf, he asked, "What's this?" Richard recognized it as part of an old luggage set from his late mother-in-law. He attempted to open it, but found the latches locked. "Just put it with the other stuff," he said. It took 2 hours to clear the closet. After a break, they disassembled the furniture and moved it to the garage. By dinner time, they were exhausted. Richard gave Mark $20 for pizza, and they had beer waiting in the fridge. After dinner, Mark left to avoid upsetting his wife, Brandy. Richard cleaned up and got back to work, prepping the room for painting. By 9 p.m., he was done with taping, plastering, and sanding. Tired, he grabbed a beer and collapsed in his lounge chair, falling asleep almost immediately. The next morning, Mark arrived at 7 a.m., as promised, and they ate a quick breakfast of cereal. "Today's all about painting," Richard said. "I'll handle the high spots, you do the lower ones. We need to finish everything, no matter how late." Mark agreed, noting that Brandy would be at her mother's all day. They spent the day painting, wrapping up with Richard, again asleep with a beer in front of the TV, but this time, he showered first. On Tuesday, October 5th at 6 a.m., the carpet installation crew arrived. With nothing to do but stay out of their way, Richard had breakfast and marveled at how quickly the professionals worked. By 10 a.m., the carpet was installed, and he had some time before the furniture arrived at noon. Richard began sorting through the spare room, finding the beige cosmetics case again. It seemed heavier than it should, and curiosity got the best of him. He tried to open it with a paperclip, but was interrupted by the doorbell. The furniture delivery arrived, and after showing them where everything went, Richard left them to do their job. Once the new furniture was in place, Richard started the long process of moving everything back from the spare room. By midnight, exhausted, he gave up and headed for his lounge chair, beer in hand. On Wednesday, October 6, 2010, Richard slept in. By 9 a.m., he took the old furniture to Goodwill and stopped at Denny's for breakfast. By noon, He was back home, finishing the cleanup. After placing everything back in the bedroom, he hung a banner over the bed that read, "Surprise." Before calling it a day, Richard noticed a foot-long gouge in the paint. "Damn," he muttered, and spent a few minutes touching it up. Afterward, he decided to clean up, shower, and have dinner. While washing his paintbrush in the bathroom, it fell and landed on the small cosmetics case. Frustrated, he grabbed a rag and some turpentine, cleaning the case until it looked as good as new. Curious about the case's contents, Richard retrieved a jar of old keys from the garage and found one that fit the Samsonite luggage locks. Sitting at the kitchen table, Richard unlocked the case. Inside, he found a large, unopened manila envelope addressed to Joan from an A. Stevens in Seattle, dated September 15, 1991. He set it aside and pulled out a blue bikini, smiling at the thought of Joan wearing it. But what he discovered next made his heart skip a beat. Beneath the bikini was a photo of Joan kissing another man at a dinner table. Shocked, Richard's hands trembled as he examined the photo. His mind couldn't process why his wife was kissing someone else. Feeling nauseous, he rushed to the bathroom. After calming down, he returned to the kitchen and stared at the contents on the table. The cosmetics case, the manila envelope, the bikini, and the photo. His world crumbling before him. Richard sat down and pulled out a stack of photos from the case. Each one featured the same man, some formal, some explicit, including a few old Polaroids. He found a woman's white silk scarf wrapped around letters tied with a red ribbon. The letters, addressed to Joan at work, were postmarked between 1989 and 1991. Richard took the earliest letter and began to read. June 22nd, 1989. My dearest Joan, it's been only a month, but I miss you terribly. I miss your voice, your touch, your lips, and most of all, your presence beside me in bed. I'll only call and write you at work, as you asked, to avoid any trouble. San Diego is everything I hoped for, but it's incomplete without you. I can't wait to be with you again. With all my love, Tim. Stunned, Richard shouted, "Holy crap, she had a lover!" He threw the letter down, overwhelmed by questions. He realized the only way to understand was to go through everything in the case. He moved the contents to the living room and sat down, muttering about Joan's pack rat habits. He started unpacking the case. Inside was a blue felt jewelry box containing a gold heart-shaped locket he recognized from a photo of Joan at a fancy dinner. He found napkins with "I love you" written on one and a phone number on the other, an invitation to a 1990 awards ceremony for Dr. Timothy Dahl and guest, and a dried red rose. Other items included matchbooks, hotel receipts, a California map, and personal mementos like a black velvet sleep mask and a tube of KY jelly. Confused and hurt, Richard opened the large manila envelope. Inside were more letters and photos, including Polaroids of Joan, some explicit, others of her with Tim. His stomach churned, but he forced himself to continue. Richard found letters Joan had written to Tim, expressing her deep love and pain at his move to California. She begged him to return, saying she couldn't let him go. Overwhelmed, Richard cried out, unsure what to do. Torn between his love for Joan and the revelation of her affair, he collapsed in tears, curling up on the floor until he fell asleep. On Thursday, October 7th, 2010, Joan was frustrated with her phone's lack of signal. "Why can't I get a connection?" she muttered. Brenda, ever sarcastic, replied, "We're on a ship, dummy. Why do you want to call home anyway? Rich is probably doing something boring. Enjoy yourself." Annoyed, Joan shot back, "You're a pain sometimes. I'm going to see if I can get a message to Rich," and walked off, calling Brenda a witch under her breath. At the ship's communications office, Joan tried calling home, but no one answered. She sent an email to Rich, detailing the fun she was having and Brenda's antics, then returned to the pool, disappointed she couldn't reach him. Meanwhile, Richard woke up on the living room floor, surrounded by the contents of Joan's cosmetics case. The pain from discovering her affair lingered, but he knew he had to face the day. After his morning routine, he stared at the mess on the floor, his eyes resting on an unclothed photo of Joan from her babe period. Richard reflected on their history. They had known each other since high school, where Joan, though average in appearance, saw something special in Richard. They dated through college and married shortly after graduating. Richard worked in computer science, and Joan became a lab technologist. They gradually built their careers, bought a house, and had a son, Mark. After a few years, Joan entered what Richard called her babe period. She lost weight, tanned, and got a new wardrobe, attracting attention wherever they went. Despite the admiration from others, Joan remained loyal to Richard. However, Joan's babe period ended when she became emotionally drained from work, leading to a period of depression. Richard took care of Mark and the household until Joan recovered. One day, she tearfully apologized for forgetting Richard's birthday, overwhelmed by her struggles. Richard reassured her, joking that she could make it up to him over the weekend. Soon after, Joan gained weight again, returning to her pre-babe period size. The attention she once received faded, but she and Richard were happy. Richard didn't care about the weight. He loved her and found her voluptuousness sexy. Now, Richard stood over the contents of Joan's cosmetics case, staring at her unclothed photo. No matter how much this hurts, I need to find out what this all means. And if we still have a future, he said aloud. He picked up the next letter. August 19th, 1989. Darling Joan, our time together last week was incredible. I can still smell your perfume and hear your moans. The plane ride home was agonizing because I was getting further from you. Our love won't fade, even with distance. The third time we made love was the most tender experience of my life. I love you so much. With all my heart, Tim. Richard thought, this is exactly how Joan and I used to be. But now, she's doing this with someone else. Angry and hurt, he grabbed the next letter. August 21st, 1989. My love, it took me days to recover from our time together, but I'd do it all again. I'm sorry we only had one day, but it was unforgettable. I love you deeply. I'm so torn between you and my perfect life at home. I need both of you in my life. I can't imagine living without either of you. I'm confused, but know you'll always be in my heart and bed. Joan. Stunned, Richard muttered. She loves both of us? Is she crazy? Or am I missing something? What if Mark isn't even my son? Determined to uncover the truth, Richard continued reading the letters throughout the day. Occasionally, he took breaks to pace, get fresh air, or cry. As he examined more of the contents, Richard found further evidence of Joan's affair, receipts, matchbooks, and other mementos from their secret meetings. Life as he knew it had completely unraveled. As Richard was about to put everything back into the cosmetics case, he noticed another letter he hadn't seen before. It was from Anna Stevens, Tim's sister, dated August 14th, 1991. Joan, my name is Anna Stevens, Tim's sister. I found your letter to him and was shocked. I never imagined Tim having an affair, but it's clear from your words that you loved each other deeply. Tim died last week in a car accident. We had his funeral yesterday, and I've enclosed a service card for you. I'm helping his wife Ellen sort through his belongings and will try to keep her from finding out about you. If I find more of your things, I'll send them to you. Please don't contact me or Tim's family. I'm sorry for your loss. Anna Stevens. The letter was tear-stained and crumpled. This explains why Joan was so depressed that month, Richard thought. Her lover had just died. No wonder she was in bed for weeks and even missed my birthday. Richard wrestled with how Joan could claim to love both him and her lover. How do you give 100% to two people? She had to lie to me constantly about where she was, those lab conventions, and even her love for me. He realized Joan's affair with the married doctor had lasted over 3 years, likely starting around the time the doctor came to the hospital. They met secretly at hotels, sometimes in Joan's office, and continued their affair even after he moved to San Diego. They saw each other during his visits home or on out-of-town trips. Joan passed off as work conferences. Lost in thought, Richard noticed it was already 10 p.m. He had spent the entire day reading and reflecting. Needing air, he stepped outside into the night, leaving the door unlocked, confused and hurt. The next day, Joan left another voicemail. Rich, where are you? I tried to call yesterday. I miss you and love you. Please be there tonight, or I might just stay on this ship forever. Back at home, Richard listened silently, bitterly muttering, She says she loves me. Liar. He stumbled to the bathroom, haunted by her words. I love you too, you two-timing witch, he replied to the imaginary Joan in his head. But I can't believe anything you say anymore. I've got to figure out what to do. Determined to plan his next steps, Richard looked at himself in the mirror. God, you look awful, he said. You haven't showered or eaten in days. That's the first thing to fix. After a hot shower, shave, and a quick breakfast of cereal, Richard sat at the kitchen table to think about his future. An hour later, he had a rough plan and started making a list of tasks. His top priority was to determine if Mark was his biological son. He ordered a home DNA testing kit for overnight delivery. With a week until Joan returned, he decided to keep busy with chores to avoid sinking into depression. Meanwhile, Joan grew increasingly worried about not hearing from Richard. She left messages for both him and Mark, asking her son to check on his father. "I hope nothing's wrong," she thought, her concern growing. The next day, Mark grumbled as he headed to his dad's house, annoyed at having to check on him. After pounding on the door, Richard finally called out from the backyard where he was trimming a tree. Frustrated, Mark got his father a bottle of water and then retrieved the mail, which included the DNA test kit. Richard, pretending it was a flu test, convinced Mark to participate. Afterward, Mark urged his father to call Joan and left. Richard completed the DNA test and sealed it in the return envelope, ready to mail on Monday. He spent the rest of the day doing household chores to keep his mind off Joan. That night, he finally ate a decent meal, pizza and beer. On Sunday morning, Richard left a voicemail for Joan saying he was fine and would call her on Monday. He spent the day at the park watching ducks and families, trying to distract himself. On Monday, October 11th, Richard followed his usual routine but made significant changes. He mailed the DNA test and then went to his workplace's HR office to apply for immediate retirement, something he hadn't planned to do until Joan could retire too. Those plans were now gone. He informed his boss of his decision and took 2 weeks of leave. Before leaving, Richard called his friend and attorney, Luke Pauley, asking for a meeting at 1 p.m. Luke agreed, and Richard prepared to seek advice on his next steps. An hour later, after a few quick goodbyes, Richard's 30-year career with the county government was over, fitting into just 2 boxes. He then visited the bank, splitting his funds into a new checking account in his name. He also retrieved his passport and important papers from the safety deposit box. The bank helped him get a new credit card and remove his name from Joan's. He paid off the balance. At the insurance agency, he changed the beneficiary of his life insurance from Joan and Mark to just Mark and updated the car insurance to separate their policies. Next, Richard met with his attorney, Luke Pauley. Luke joked about how they should get together more often, then noticed Richard seemed troubled. Richard asked about the statute of limitations on divorce and explained Joan's affair. Luke was shocked, unable to believe it, but Richard insisted on divorce papers. Luke advised him to talk to Joan and consider counseling, but as his lawyer, he agreed to draft the papers, suggesting a 50-50th split. Richard also asked Luke to remove Joan from his will, making Mark the sole beneficiary. Luke recommended again that Richard talk to Joan, but Richard wasn't ready. He wanted time alone to think and would contact Luke once settled. That night, unable to sleep in the newly redecorated bedroom, Richard ended up in the lounge chair, thinking about the days ahead. On Tuesday, October 12, 2010, Richard received another voicemail from Joan but didn't respond. He knew he needed to finalize everything before she returned, planning to be gone before then. By Wednesday, October 13, 2010, Richard had his new credit card and everything set up at the bank. He called Luke to check on the paperwork, but Luke deliberately delayed it, hoping Richard would talk to Joan. Richard gave Luke a landline number for emergencies, but insisted Joan not be given the number. Richard spent the rest of the day preparing to leave. Disappointed that the DNA test results hadn't arrived, he still quietly disappeared that night at 9 p.m., leaving everything behind. Thursday, October 14, 2010. Joan, in a panic, calls Mark. "Mark, go check on your father. I haven't spoken to him since I left. Call me right back after you find him. I need to talk to him before I get home Friday, and someone has to pick us up at the airport." "Yes, Mom, I'll call you after I talk to Dad. Bye," Mark replies, dropping the phone and drifting back to sleep next to Brandy. Friday, October 15, 2010. Joan and Brenda return from their trip. "Wake up, we're home." Joan nudges her sister as the airport shuttle drops her off at the house. Brenda mumbles, "Just let me sleep until they get to my house," turning away from the door. Joan tips the driver, hauls her luggage inside, and calls out, "Rich, I'm home. Where are you?" Silence. She checks the kitchen for a note, but finds nothing. She opens the back door and calls again, still no response. "He must be at the airport waiting for us," she thinks. Joan calls Richard's cell phone, only to hear it ringing on the counter. "He forgot it again," she sighs. She starts unpacking upstairs. When she opens the bedroom door, she's stunned by the transformation. A large surprise banner hangs over the bed. Everything is just as she dreamed. "Rich, you sneaky planner," she thinks. "I can't wait to thank you tonight." She admires the new furniture, carpet, and colors, overwhelmed with happiness. But as she unpacks, her eyes fall on the banner again. A small photo is attached, a picture of her and Tim at the Chicago Awards banquet with the number written over her face. Her heart sinks. "Oh my God, no!" Panicked, Joan searches for the cosmetics case but can't find it. She tears through the house, growing more desperate. Realizing Richard must have found it, she collapses on the bed, crying uncontrollably. She tries calling Mark, her sister, and their friends. No one knows where Richard is. Feeling alone, she sobs, terrified that he's gone for good. After an hour, Joan tries calling everyone again, but still no luck. Brenda eventually arrives and tries to calm her. He can't have gone far. Have you called his friends? Maybe he's at a ball game? But Brenda's words only heighten Joan's anxiety. Joan can't bring herself to tell Brenda the truth about Tim. She's convinced Richard discovered the affair from 20 years ago and left for good. She sends Brenda home, promising to call if Richard shows up. Saturday, October 16th, 2010. Joan spends the day crying and worrying. Brenda suggests calling the police, but when Joan does, the dispatcher tells her she has to wait 24 hours to report someone missing. Joan also contacts local hospitals but finds no trace of Richard. While relieved he isn't hurt, she's even more anxious because she still can't find him. Sunday. Joan doesn't hear from Richard and spends the entire day in bed crying and praying. God, please bring Rich back. I'll do anything. Just let him call so we can talk. I love him, and my heart is breaking. Monday. Joan files a missing persons report with the police. An officer comes by, takes Richard's photo and description, and leaves with the vague promise, "We'll let you know if we find anything." Joan fears this means they'll call only if they find his body. Later, Joan opens an overnight envelope addressed to Richard, hoping for a clue. Inside is a letter from a DNA testing company confirming that Richard and Mark are indeed father and son. Joan, familiar with DNA tests, realizes Richard must have doubted Mark's paternity, thinking Tim could be Mark's father. But Tim came into my life after Mark was born, she thinks. She notices the results were also sent to Luke Pauley, their lawyer, and decides to call him. Joan contacts Luke, who explains that Richard was deeply depressed and mentioned the contents of her cosmetics case. He says Richard felt betrayed and needed time to think. Luke admits that Richard asked him to prepare divorce papers, but hasn't signed them yet. Joan pleads to know where Richard is, but Luke insists he doesn't know. However, he promises to contact her before Richard signs anything. Joan spends the rest of the day crying and praying for Richard to return. 10 days later, frustrated with Luke's delay, Joan discovers through Mark that Richard is staying at Aunt Mary's lake house. She drives there, finding Richard sitting by the water looking unkempt and lost. She sits beside him, but he doesn't acknowledge her, staring into the distance. Joan takes his cold hand and begins speaking. "Rich, I have a story to tell you. I'll be completely honest and answer any questions. Please, honey, just listen." Richard remains still, but Joan continues talking. "I met Tim at Mark's 3rd birthday party at the hospital daycare. He mistook the party for his daughter, who shares the same birthday as Mark. We laughed and talked about our kids and, eventually, about ourselves. He was a new doctor, feeling overwhelmed, so we started having lunch together regularly. We became friends, and he introduced me to research that led me to join Weight Watchers. Over time, our conversations grew more personal. He complimented me on my weight loss, and we began sharing our desires and fantasies. One day, he invited me to dinner after work, and I realized I had feelings for him. At dinner, we admitted our feelings but agreed we didn't want to hurt our spouses. However, after that, we started holding hands, and eventually he kissed me. I felt the same way with his kiss as I did with yours, Rich. We had dinner at the Marriott one night and ended up getting a room. That's when we first made love. I loved him just as I loved you, and I couldn't understand how I could love 2 men at once. I didn't want it to stop, and we continued seeing each other. I loved both of you deeply and didn't know how to solve the problem." Suddenly, Richard stands up and walks toward the house without a word. Joan, stunned, tries to follow, but all the doors are locked. As dusk falls and the temperature drops, she retreats to her car, determined to wait for him. The next morning, Joan wakes to the sound of a motorboat. She sees Richard in a small skiff, drifting in the middle of the lake. She watches as he stands up and falls into the water, knowing he can't swim. Panicked, she screams for help, and a neighbor rushes out in his boat. Joan watches anxiously as the neighbor brings Richard back to shore. She can't tell if he's alive. Together, they get Richard inside, out of his wet clothes, and onto a bed. After thanking the neighbor, Joan spends the next hour cleaning Richard up, dressing him in dry clothes, and even shaving him. Then, she sits beside the bed, watching him sleep. 2 hours later, Richard gets up, goes to the kitchen table, and finally acknowledges Joan. He stares at her and begins to cry. After several attempts, he manages to speak. "Do you remember me telling you about my old girlfriend, Carolyn? We dated for about a year. One day, she broke up with me over the phone, saying she had a new boyfriend. I rushed to her house, and they were waiting for me. I was furious but didn't do anything, even when her new boyfriend taunted me. I walked away, humiliated. Later, I ran into her new boyfriend again. I planned to strike him up with a pool stick I kept in my car, but a guy from the neighborhood, Larry, stopped me. He told me no girl was worth what I was about to do. I believed him until I met you. You are worth everything, even dying for. Today on the lake, I thought of that story again. I realized that eliminating myself over what you did was wrong. I wanted to live, to talk to you. I need to know why. Richard then puts his head down on the table. Joan embraces him, and they quietly cry together. After a long silence, Richard looks at Joan and simply says, "Let's go home." 2 months later, life remains tense between them. They live in the same house, but sleep in separate rooms. Richard is distant, and Joan is always on edge. They haven't really talked, and their son Mark only visits briefly. Every weekend, Richard spends time at Aunt Mary's house while Joan worries he might damage himself again. Today is Mark's birthday, and the family gathers for cake and presents. When it's Richard's turn, he retrieves the cosmetics case and the DNA test report from the garage, placing them on the table. Joan is horrified, unsure of his intentions. Richard calmly says, "Mark, your mother has a story to tell you. It won't be easy, but you need to listen." Then he leaves the house. Joan, overwhelmed, runs from the room in tears. Mark and his wife Brandy try to comfort her, but all they hear is her crying behind the bedroom door. After about an hour, Joan comes back down and begins telling Mark about her past with Tim. Around midnight, Richard returns home and tells Mark, "Go home, I'll take it from here." After they leave, Richard hands Joan a card that reads, "Dr. Jean Brooks, marriage counselor. We have an appointment next Tuesday at 6. Without another word, he heads upstairs to bed. Next Tuesday, Dr. Brooks prepares for her session with the Alexanders. This case will be challenging, she thinks. It looks like typical infidelity, but there are deeper layers. I hope I can help them. When Richard and Joan arrive, Dr. Brooks warmly welcomes them. "Please have a seat on the couch," she says. "Joan, I specialize in marital issues, particularly infidelity. My goal is to uncover the root causes and help couples find common ground. Sometimes couples decide to part ways, but I'm optimistic we can find a way forward. I don't perform miracles, but we'll find answers. Our sessions will involve open discussions with honesty as the key rule. I'll guide the conversation and stop it when needed. I won't sugarcoat things, and you might not always like what I say, but we'll uncover the truths in your marriage. Some truths will be enlightening, others painful, but we'll address them together. After our initial session, I'll meet with each of you individually to get your full perspective. After each joint session, spend time at home discussing what we talked about, but avoid new topics. If you can't discuss something calmly, save it for the next session. Any questions?" Both Joan and Richard shake their heads. "Okay, let's begin." The hour flies by, and on the way home, they don't speak. Once home, Joan asks, "How do you want to handle this? Maybe we could talk for an hour after we get home with some wine in the living room. I'll need tissues. How does that sound?" Richard agrees, but suggests a couple of changes. "Let's have soda or water, no booze. I don't want to say something I'll regret," and turn off the phones so we aren't interrupted. Joan agrees and fetches the phones. They sit in silence for a while, unsure of where to start. Finally, Richard breaks the silence. "Today, you said you've always been happy with me, but how can that be true if you were with another man right after we married? Didn't I give you what you wanted? What did I do wrong?" Joan interrupts. "Dr. Brooks said to stick to what we discussed today. Just about us, not anyone else. We'll address others after we've discussed it in session. But I will say this, I've always been happy with you and our marriage, Rich. That's the truth. I love you and always have. If you were gone, I would be lost. That's my truth, as God is my witness." Richard sighs. "You're right, Joan. I got ahead of myself. You know how impatient I can be. Until recently, I thought we had an ideal marriage. Sure, we had our arguments, but I never doubted us. I never looked for anyone else. You were always my anchor. But now, everything I believed in feels upside down. I don't know what's real anymore. It hurts to even look at you because I can't stop thinking about those letters and imagining you with—" "Stop," Joan interrupts. "We'll talk about that later, not now." "Fine, but answer this. How many others were there? Should I expect to find more secrets around the house? How many men have you been with during our happy marriage?" "What are you accusing me of?" Joan snaps. "I've only been with 2 men, Tim and you. Now you're accusing me of sleeping around?" From my perspective, you lied about one man. How can I trust you didn't lie about others? Richard counters, his voice rising. I haven't been with anyone else, Joan insists. But let's discuss that in session. No, I need to know now. I can't keep living with this pain. If we can't talk about it, then I'm done. I'm going to bed. Richard storms upstairs, slamming the door. Joan sits in the dark, muttering, that didn't go well. 4 weeks later, the drive home from another session is tense. They both wait to talk until they're home. Once settled, Joan speaks first. Hon, you never told me you read all the letters. I didn't think about it at first, Richard replies flatly. I was angry and embarrassed, hiding all this from you. I didn't consider your pain, what it would do to you to read those letters. I'm so sorry, Rich. I can't change the past, but I'll do anything to help us move forward. I love you, and I want you back. Richard takes a deep breath. Joan, I never stopped loving you, even when this felt like the worst pain of my life. But the worst part is the images of you with another man. They haunt me constantly, making me physically sick. I don't think you can understand that kind of pain. Rich, we need to talk to Dr. Brooks about dealing with those thoughts. But for now, let's just focus on being together. Maybe we can take a few days off, go to the mountains, and just be us without pressure. How does that sound? I'm not sure, Richard replies cautiously. I still feel uneasy around you, but if we want to move forward, we need to be together. So, okay, let's go. Just no sharp objects, he jokes, making them both laugh for the first time in a while. 2 weeks later, during the drive home, Joan hesitates, but finally asks, Rich, what did you mean by my babe period? I don't want to talk about it, Richard replies curtly. Why not? Because it hurts too much. Let's drop it. I don't understand. What did I do that hurt you? Reluctantly, Richard responds, your babe period was when you joined Weight Watchers, lost weight, tanned, got your nails done, and bought a new sexy wardrobe. You were no longer the cute, overweight woman I married. You became a babe. Men noticed you, and I was proud but also worried someone better might take you away. It all changed when you got sick and returned to your old self. I loved you then and now, but knowing that transformation wasn't for me but for another man hurts. It ruins the memory. Joan whispers, Oh God, how could you? Richard silently leaves for bed. 8 weeks later, after a tense session with Dr. Brooks, they sit quietly in the living room. Richard finally says, I don't get it. Dr. Brooks said loving two people at once is common, but it sounds like nonsense to me. I understand the logic, but not the emotions. Joan tries to explain. She meant I loved both you and Tim simultaneously, which usually leads to someone getting hurt. We were hurt later. The sequential part is when people move on to love again after a loss, which is common. I get it. Richard sighs. But I don't. I can't imagine loving someone else without diminishing my love for you. You can't give 100% to two people at the same time. Joan admits. I don't fully understand it either, but when I was with you, you were my whole world. When I was with Tim, he was. It was like flipping a switch between you two. I loved both of you completely. Richard nods. We'll need to keep talking about this. For now, let's write down questions for the next session. They both remain unsatisfied and retreat to separate bedrooms. 6 weeks later, Joan is crying much less as they sit in the living room. Richard begins, Honey, I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't mean it. Well, maybe I did in some way, but I wasn't trying to hurt you or be spiteful. I just said I was glad he died because I didn't have to share you with him. It wasn't until Dr. Brooks explained that his end of life was as hard on you as mine would be that I started to see it from your perspective. I get it a little now. The man you loved died, and you had no one to grieve with. You were alone in your grief. You had me, but you couldn't tell me without losing me. I understand why you were depressed. I would have been too if you had died. I'm sorry I said it the way I did. I didn't mean it. Oh, Rich, you can be so damn stubborn sometimes, Joan responds, her voice quivering with emotion. You've been trying to understand how I could feel the same way about two men at once, but you don't see how losing one of them would devastate me? Well, do you get it now? I loved him. He died. I died too. I grieved, just like I would have if you had died. It's the same now as it was 20 years ago. If you had died on that lake, I would have died too. Do you understand now? Richard looks a bit embarrassed, but replies, I guess on some level I do. I didn't mean it that way. I can be selfish too. We just touched on this today, but when you found out about Tim, I felt like I had to go through all the sorrow of his end of life all over again. I guess I still have feelings for him. I haven't thought of him in years, but I can still see his face. He'll always be in my memories. Now that you know, I have to relive all that pain again, and it's eliminating me. Can we let Dr. Brooks guide us through this next week? I can see it's going to be hard for both of us. Okay, Joan agrees softly, but get me a glass of wine before you go to bed. I need some time alone. Richard gets the wine, turns off the living room lights, and heads upstairs. At the top of the stairs, he hears sobbing from downstairs. He quietly closes his bedroom door. 8 weeks later, Joan finally lets her anger show. I can't talk to you tonight. You make me so mad I could strangle you. You wanted a divorce without even talking to me? Are you crazy? We've talked about everything since we were married, and at this crucial point you want to handle this alone? What are you thinking? I'm going to bed. Now it's Richard's turn to sit in the dark living room with a beer. He doesn't care much for wine. The next morning, some say the smell of brewing coffee can wake the dead. That's Richard's first thought as he wakes up. He opens one eye slightly and sees the living room ceiling. The smell of coffee is still there. He opens his other eye and turns his head toward the kitchen. He sees a tall woman in a bathrobe holding a steaming cup of coffee. Breakfast is almost ready. Go clean up. Go, Joan says firmly. Joan is the woman in the bathrobe that Richard sees. After all these years, she still looks like a goddess in the morning, voluptuous and earthy. His heart beats a little faster, and it's not because of the coffee. Richard sits up and accidentally knocks over the empty beer bottle. He heads to the bathroom, relieves himself, and washes up. In the mirror, he sees bloodshot eyes and the imprint of the couch cushion on his face. Neither looks good, but he goes back downstairs for breakfast anyway. After a delicious meal, one he didn't have to cook, he leans back and really looks at Joan for the first time that day. She, too, has bloodshot eyes. I'm sorry, Joan says quietly. I'm still struggling with seeing things from your perspective. We need to write that down for Dr. Brooks next time. Richard smiles, something he hasn't done much lately. That's okay. I struggle with it too. Sometimes when I say something, I don't think about how it'll sound to you or how it'll make you feel. I'm sorry too. He pauses. How about we have our conversation this morning? Wait a minute, Joan interrupts. What are you doing off work today? I took the day off because it's more important to be here and talk this out with you than to push papers at the lab. They can manage without me today. An hour later, they're sitting in the backyard with another cup of coffee, talking. Why did you ask Luke to draft divorce papers? Joan asks. I was so hurt and confused. I wasn't thinking straight. All I knew was that you cheated and I didn't want anything to do with you anymore. I've always believed, once a cheater, always a cheater. I didn't want to go through that again. Like I said, I wasn't thinking straight. But why didn't you want to talk to me? Maybe we could have worked it out, Joan presses. I know. If we had talked, I would have said things I'd regret. It would have hurt both of us, maybe beyond repair. I also knew that if we talked, I wouldn't understand anything you said. There was too much going on in my mind. Besides, I was hurt and thought if you suffered too, I'd feel better. But, by the way, I don't feel better. Joan sighs. That actually makes sense. I probably thought all those nasty things about myself too. We need to let Dr. Brooks guide us through this. We can't leave anything unsaid or unresolved. We have to be careful and take our time. Joan, can I ask you something off topic? Sure, anything. Did you ever think about leaving me while you were with him? Never. I loved you. I never thought about leaving you. You've always been my world. I wasn't going to give you up. I loved both of you. We haven't resolved that issue yet, but I could never have given up either of you. I would have died. It's still an open wound for me. I don't know if I'll ever resolve it. I may have to live with it as one of life's unanswered questions, but I'm glad you didn't want to leave me. Richard smiles faintly. Been there, done that, as they say. I understand. Now let's shut up and get some sun. You're too pale. It was a beautiful sunny day, and the Alexanders were outside, enjoying the sun. A few weeks later, after a therapy session, Richard says, Wow, that was eye-opening. Do we want to talk about it now or sleep on it? I'm still wired from the session. I say we talk now, but you look exhausted. I'm okay, Joan replies. It's just hard. Remembering everything and being completely open about Zex has always been difficult for me. Even saying head out loud is tough. I'm mentally exhausted, but we can still talk if you want. Tonight, though, I'll need something stronger than soda. Okay, you relax, and I'll get us something to drink. Richard says. He fetches a glass of wine for Joan and a soda for himself. When he returns to the living room, he sees Joan on the couch, her head back and eyes closed. For a moment, he considers quietly covering her with a blanket and going to bed. But she opens her eyes and gives him a faint, crooked smile. The same smile that first caught his attention in high school. "Okay, hun, where do you want to start?" Joan asks. "I'm not sure. How about explaining what you meant when you said he rocked your world differently from me? I always thought our Zek's life was good and that I rocked your world just fine, but evidently I didn't measure up." "It's not that you were worse or better than Tim," Joan explains. "When you and I made love, it was just making love. After Mark was born, we rarely went wild or tried new things. We were comfortable with what we did. We knew each other's every desire. We didn't need to experiment anymore. We had found what we liked and did it. Not out of boredom, but because it's what we wanted. With Tim, it was like exploring Zek's all over again. We found things we loved that were different from what you and I did. It's like we found our comfort zone. But you did things with him that you didn't do with me," Richard says, his voice pained. "No, not really. You and I tried everything," Joan replies, shaking her head. "But with Tim, we found different things we both loved that were different from you and me." "Yeah, I read that," Richard says bitterly. "Thanks for reminding me. I'm not trying to upset you. I'm just saying that when Tim and I made love, we had a different set of acts that turned us on. But in the end, we still made love. I never did anything with either of you that I didn't do with the other. If you were into something unusual, like public sex, I'd probably try it and be into it because you were. Does that make sense?" "I guess," Richard mutters. "I don't know. I'm still struggling to get the image of you with another man out of my mind. I may never get over it. I just wish I didn't see that image every time I look at you. Now that you've told me all this, it's stuck in my mind. Just one more nail in my mental coffin." "Damn. I didn't mean to hurt you more than I already have. I'm just trying to be as open and honest as possible to help us heal. It hurts me to say these things out loud just as much as it hurts you to hear them." "We've got a long way to go," Richard sighs. "I know. I'm here whenever you're ready, but only when you're comfortable. I'll wait as long as it takes. I love you, and I always will." 6 weeks later, Dr. Brooks checks her appointment book and smiles. "The Alexanders are next. Today will be quite a surprise for them. I hope they're as prepared as I think they are." When Richard and Joan walk into the waiting room, holding hands and talking, Dr. Brooks takes it as a good sign. Once they're seated in their usual spots on the couch, she begins, "How are you both today? I don't think I have any unresolved issues from last time, so I'll just ask if you have anything you want to discuss. Richard, you've had to move past those images of Joan with someone else. I imagine they still pop up and are hard to get past. You both need to be patient and talk through things when they feel wrong. You've made a lot of progress." "Yeah, I hope so," Richard replies. "This past weekend was awkward," Joan adds. "We know what to expect, but we're still carrying baggage, trying not to trip over it." She looks directly at Richard. "We will get better, hun, I promise. I love you and will do whatever it takes to make you feel comfortable with me, with us. Nothing is more important to me than having you back with me every night. I've missed you more than you know. I need you, and I love you." Richard nods. "Just be patient. We've got some demons to conquer." After a long pause, Dr. Brooks gives them the news. "This will be our last session. You've come a long way since our first meeting, and I think it's time for you to go on your own. I'll always be here if you need me, but now the best therapy is for you two to figure out what's normal for you. You've learned a lot about yourselves and each other, some good and some not so good." Richard then turns to Joan, his voice steady. "Joan, I've loved you with all my heart, but unlike you, I only had you in my heart. I never divided my attention or loyalty. You've said you loved both of us, but that's where I fail to understand. How can you give your all to both of us? I'm your lawfully married husband. You promised to be loyal and forsake all others, but breaking that promise shows me you haven't given me your all. If I stay with you, I'll always be the man who wasn't fully loved by his wife. I accidentally found out about your relationship with Tim. You never told me how you felt. If you had, I would have divorced you, and the pain would have been less than what it is now. I'm not sure what shortcomings I had as a husband that led to this affair, but it's been a year of agony. I was put on this journey by the person I loved and trusted the most. I don't trust you anymore. I don't know how many more secrets I might uncover if I dig deeper. I know I'm not the only man in your heart, and that hurts. I can't live with that feeling for the rest of my life. Looking at you and knowing how you lied to me for so many years, making me live a dream that was rotten with deceit and betrayal. It's unbearable. So I'm left with no choice but to be on my own. I'll file for divorce tomorrow. We'll split everything 50-50 and move on. I won't hold any ill feelings toward you because when I leave this room today, I won't carry any feelings for you at all. You may contest the divorce, but I don't plan to stay with you. Since you didn't consider our marriage before starting your affair, I won't either. Divorced or not, that status won't hold me back. I'm mentally, emotionally, and spiritually divorced from you. Thank you, doctor, for the sessions. Now I don't care what Joan has to say. You've been paid and my therapy is over. He gets up, looks at Joan, who is crying, but says nothing. He walks out, feeling the fresh air on his face. It feels great. For the first time in ages, he feels relaxed. He feels free. Joan is served divorce papers the following week. Richard has already taken his half of the money, leaving only the house to divide. He moves into a new condo near his office. Joan tries to contact him, but he never answers her calls or messages. Their son tries to intervene, but Richard asks him, "What if, after years of bliss, you woke up in a nightmare? Would you still live in that nightmare?" His son stops asking after that. 2 years later, Richard is finally free of his marriage. Joan tried every tactic, but he paid no attention. She begged, threatened, and cried, but it didn't matter to him. At his age, finding a new partner seemed unlikely, but Richard found comfort in living with his 3 German shepherds. He knew for sure that they only loved him.